Becky, good morning. Yes, joining us right now from Dallas, the Dallas Fed President, Robert Kaplan. President Kaplan, thanks for joining us this morning.
Good to see you, Steve.
I want to start off right where at the heart of the market's concerns here. I want to know if you share the inflation concerns that have been expressed by some in the market. We noticed that Chair Powell doesn't mention the word inflation in his testimony today. Does that mean it's not a concern?
I think we're wise to pay attention to those concerns and be vigilant about them. Having said that, my own base case is that we'll see a surge in prices this year. A lot of that'll be due to supply outages related to COVID, supply-demand issues, other issues, metals, semiconductors, wood products, and so on. But I do believe that a lot of those supply-demand issues will get worked out over the next year, and that's what I'm hearing from companies in those industries. And I still believe technology-enabled disruption is a powerful force, so that inflation in 2022 will settle down a bit, and we'll still be running at or a little bit above 2%. Now, having said that, that's a forecast, it's a base case, and I think we're wise at the Fed, and I intend to be very vigilant about it and be watching this very, very carefully.
How high might it go? Inflation, that is.
Well, for this year, I'm thinking that year-over-year inflation this year will be 2.25% to 2.5%. But you got to remember that's comparing this year to last year, and last year the base effects were such we had very low inflation. But I'm not looking for higher than 2.25%, 2.5%. If I saw something more than that, my first question would be, what's the cause of it? Is it something that's transitory, short term, or is it something more persistent? But right now, I'm still of the view that as we get beyond this year, inflation, just to remind your viewers, is not a one-time price surge. It's year after year price increases. And I think the jury's very much out as to whether we're going to see that. It's not my base case.
Let me turn to policy, which remains unchanged. And I've been sort of perplexed as to how the economic facts have changed, but the policy has not. There was an unexpected win by the Democrats in November. I guess it actually was early January when the Democrats took the Senate. Now there's a $1.9 trillion stimulus bill that was not, frankly, expected by a lot on Wall Street or even others who follow the economy. And yet Fed policy is unchanged despite this massive fiscal package. How do you justify keeping in place the massive $120 billion of stimulus, zero interest rates, when you have this massive fiscal package?
So the forecast, as you mentioned, has improved. My forecast has improved meaningfully. I'm expecting 6.5% growth for 2021. I'm expecting the unemployment rate to approach 4% by the end of this year. Having said that, we're still in the middle of the pandemic, and I want to see more than a forecast. I want to see actual evidence that forecast is going to unfold. As we do, and as we make substantial further progress in meeting our dual mandate goals, I, for one, am going to be an advocate of beginning the process of removing some of these extraordinary monetary measures and doing it sooner rather than later. But I need to see outcomes, not just a strong forecast.
President Kaplan, thanks, Steve. And Steve, I may ask one of your questions because you said it earlier that even you are, that the $3 trillion. It's a real number. Starts adding up after a while. But Steve made the point that the Fed and fiscal authorities are really in sync, and they have each other's back, and they're moving forward. And it's weird because you got, former Fed Chair Yellen is now, sort of promoting some of the fiscal policy. So it's like we haven't seen that before. So we did $1.9 trillion. If we do $3 trillion additional, are you just fine with that at this point, President Kaplan? Is it like, go for it? We got 9 million people that don't have jobs. Let's do what you got to do, guys, and we've got your back. Is that where you are?
Well, there's a few phases of this. While we're in the midst of the pandemic, I think we should be aggressive, and we're not out of it yet. Having said that, as we do move out of this pandemic and move beyond it, I think monetary policy needs to adapt to the aggressive fiscal policy. And our forecasts reflect that aggressive fiscal policy, at least the 1.9 trillion, and mine certainly does. And while there's a median dot, which Steve was referring to in the SEP, some of us, I'm not at the median. I have a forecast for removing accommodation that's more aggressive than the median. And I think monetary policy should react to that. So that's what I'd say about that.
Steve, do you want to drill down more on that?
Yeah, I mean, I think you and I would both have the same follow-up here. So, President Kaplan, I know this sounds weird, but where's your dot? Are you a 2022 guy in terms of raising rates?
There were some dots starting increases in 2022, and you know, I'm at one of those dots. Yes.
Fascinating. And let me ask you about removing accommodation. And Joe, I'm sorry if you want to follow up, but I'll just get this one out there.
I feel like I stole your stuff already, but when I get you to say
no.
3 trillion, it's got 3 trillion. That sounds after 1.9. We're like desensitized, President Kaplan. I think you need to talk to your colleagues, and you still got a relationship with Chair Yellen, Secretary Yellen.
So we'll have to work our way through 21, 22, and 23. I think that it's worth remembering we're still in the midst of the pandemic right now, and we still got to move beyond the pandemic and not take that for granted. But again, I would say as we do, and as we meet the first test of substantial further progress toward our dual mandate goals, I'll be an advocate of removing some of this extraordinary accommodation, starting with bond purchases. We're just not there yet. It's an outcome-based test. Our tests for raising the Fed funds rate years in the future is an outcome-based test. And I'm going to be on my front foot watching how the economy unfolds and being prepared to act as the economy meets those benchmarks.
Might that be this year, President Kaplan?
I'm going to stay away, as you know, Steve, from calendar estimates. Our benchmarks are not calendar-based; they're outcome-based, and so I'm not going to prejudge when we're going to make substantial further progress. But as I see that test being met in my own mind, I'll be arguing for taking action. But I don't want to predict exactly when in the calendar that will be, because truth is, I don't know.
Let me turn to another aspect of Fed policy here, which is whether the Fed ought to come in and play a role in suppressing the yields on the long end in the bond market. Are you an advocate of that? Is that something the Fed should do? And did the Fed somehow give the markets the idea that that's what it would do at a certain level? Was that a mistake the Fed made in communication?
It would not be something that I would support unless there are some extraordinary circumstances. I would not be an advocate of using monetary policies to do more to distort the pricing of the Treasury curve. I would not do that. There might be circumstances that I would be open-minded to, but my baseline view is I would not do that. And I would just also emphasize, I've been one that's been saying for most of this year, I would expect the 10-year to back up further from here. And that means 1 3/4, 2%. In February of 2020, the 10-year Treasury was 1 3/4 to 2%. I don't see why, as we recover, that the 10-year rate won't back up further. I think that'll be a healthy signal, not an alarming signal, but a healthy signal, and not one that I would be an advocate of getting in the way of.
President Kaplan,
go ahead. Sorry.
Thanks, Steve. President Kaplan, there's been a lot of speculation about politics and how that plays with the Fed. I know the Fed is seen as an independent body, and I'm sure that's how you all see yourselves. But I read story after story and hear comment after comment about how Jay Powell is going to have to be very careful to make sure he doesn't do anything to upset the Biden administration before his term expires in 2022 if he wants to see a second term. It implies that he'll have to kind of get along with Janet Yellen and make sure that he keeps rates low. Is that a conversation that ever takes place, either in the room or in the back halls between any of the Fed members?
No. And so I work very closely and talk regularly with Jay Powell, and I talk regularly with my colleagues. I have not seen any evidence whatsoever of any political considerations or political influence influencing the chair or the members of the FOMC around the table. Our whole focus has been achieving our dual mandate, and during this crisis, trying to make sure the economy weathers this crisis. But I don't see any evidence of that. And I think your people watching this should have confidence that we're making decisions devoid of political influence or political considerations. I don't see any evidence of it in my daily dealings.
President Kaplan, I have two last questions, but I think I'm only going to get in one. So maybe later we can talk about whether or not you've recovered from the hazing process you got at Goldman when you first started there. But let me ask you the final question here, which is that being in Texas there, the Fed has been sort of outspoken in arguing for the kind of restrictions and mask mandates and things like that that would get the would suppress the virus. How do you feel about what's happened in Texas and the complete opening of the state by the governor?
So I'll stay away from the political aspects of state decisions, but I will tell you, the businesses in this state, by and large, have kept their mask restrictions. Why have they done that? Because they want to do more business. To the extent their customers, this is particularly in restaurants and other person-to-person contact industries, to the extent they keep their mask restrictions, people are more willing to frequent their businesses. That's true of person-to-person contact industries broadly. It's true of airlines. I hear that regularly and across the board from businesses. So while the state has made certain decisions, I've seen by and large businesses have kept their mask restrictions because they think it's good for business and they want to do more business and they want more mobility and engagement and people coming to their establishment.
President Kaplan, thank you so much for joining us today, and my hope we'll see you again soon.
See you soon, Steve. Thank you.